One of the things I thought made sense is to talk about this idea of resilience because, if we go back 6, 9 months ago, I mean, let's talk about where we've been, what we've gone through. And this is, I'm preaching to the choir here. I know all of you are quite familiar with this, but let's think about it. I mean, let's put ourselves, if you were studying our situation from an outside point of view, let's think about it. We've gone through a global pandemic, the likes of which we arguably have never seen before, but at least have not seen for at least 100 years. In addition, we saw travel completely shut down. We were, oh, sorry about that, stuck at home and quarantined and couldn't visit family, friends, neighbors, people we were used to seeing all the time. Masks are now a normal part of our life. I don't think any of us ever assumed that masks would be a part of our normal life. There's been a lot of civil and arguably rightful, but challenging and tension building civil unrest, protests, and things that our governments and our communities have had to navigate. And we're right in the middle of a very intense election cycle. Now you take all of this, and any one of these things would be overwhelming. But you take this, compounded with the fact that I'm sure some of you on the phone today or on the Zoom call might be doing home education with your kids. If you have kids at home and they're doing a virtual schooling situation, I am, and that is tough as nails, to be honest. And then you put on top of all of that a career transition, and that's to the point of being in a perfect storm of stress, anxiety, and overwhelm. And so the reason I wanted to talk about this idea of resilience is really twofold. One, from my role, so to give you a little more context, as a talent manager for Meritor. Meritor is a global manufacturing company. We manufacture industrial truck components. So if you think of a semi truck or a fire engine or a dump truck, you pop open the hood, half the stuff under there is probably stuff we make. That's really the easiest way to understand it. And I work in the talent management sector of that, which is a very specific segment of HR, where my job is to invest in the internal talent that we have. So I always like to make that distinction. I don't do talent acquisition. I don't find external talent. My job is to invest in the internal talent, and to ensure that people are bringing their best to work every day. Because let's be honest, I mean, all of us on the call today are going to spend at least the majority of our time working. The majority of your time on planet Earth quite likely will be spent working, even from a weekly, monthly, annually, even over your lifetime experience. And so one of my personal passions, and one of the phrases that I often say is, I want to make work that is fit for human beings. And I think from a more general perspective, that's what human resources, and I'm talking to my HR folks out there, I think that's what we have seen rising over the last couple of decades. But certainly now, after we've gone through a pandemic and all the situations we have, I think we're really seeing that people are not just desiring this or even expecting it, they're actually demanding it. They're demanding that organizations start to and continue to consider the health and the well-being of their people. Every company I talk to says our most valuable asset is our people, right? We say it, everyone else says it. But it's time that as organizations, we put our money where our mouth is. And we say, if that's really what we believe in, then we need to invest in our people, which means we need to help people. We need to be honest about the situations people are navigating and help them navigate through those. So that's one reason that I care about this topic of resilience. The second, though, and on a more personal level, I have to confess to all of you, I like to call myself a recovering tightwad or tightly wound person. Ever since I was little, I've always struggled off and on with bouts of anxiety. And I feel like it's important to disclose that to all of you. And I realized relatively early on that this could be a crippling factor in my life, that the degree of anxiety that I felt, but the degree of overwhelm I felt through certain scenarios or seasons of my life was really hindering me in a lot of different ways, relationally, socially, emotionally, even physically at times. And so years ago, actually decades ago, I began just self-learning about this topic of resilience. about this topic of how do and why do certain people or teams or groups seem to thrive when things get really nasty or intense or difficult, whereas others don't, because I wanted to learn it for my own personal benefit. And over the last couple of decades, I've continued to study and research this. Yes, so I can bring it into the organizations I support, whether through Meritor or through my consulting organization, or just on a personal level with myself and with my family. And what we have found is resilience over and over and over again, when we look at the social science, the psychology, the behavioral science research, consistently is shown to be one of the key factors in determining success for any one individual, team, or group, beyond IQ, beyond experience, beyond education, beyond any of these other factors. Resilience actually is one that shows the most consistent, statistically viable aspect of success. If you want to look up any of the research, Dr. Angela Duckworth from University of Pennsylvania has done extensive research on this, as does Dr. Karen Rivich, but both of them have shown resilience, being able to persevere when things are tough and when you don't have an end in sight. Does that ring a bell for anybody on the call today? I don't know when this is going to end, whether it's the pandemic or how long my kids are going to be doing school from home or when that next job is going to land. When you don't have an end in sight, it's important to equip yourself with resilience, especially now, especially when anxieties and overwhelm are high and we don't know when any of this is going to subside. So I wanted to talk today about resilience and some techniques that you can use. And I'm all about trying to make it practical. So practical techniques that you can use to help build your resilience. And we'll talk about this really in two key parts. First is going to be mental practices that you can use. Now, I'll tell you right now, I'm not a big fan of like pop psychology, quasi kind of flavor of the month self-help kind of stuff. Right? So that's just not my style. So the stuff I'm going to share with you today might feel a little bit cheesy. I'm going to warn you with that. I'm going to caution you with that one. It might feel a little forced and cheesy. It's okay if it does. But I'll tell you, this has actually been vetted through with lots of science, and it does actually work. Then the second part of what we'll talk about today are some things that you can employ, practical interventions you can employ if you're having a sense of overwhelm or you're feeling like you're not going to be able to persevere or push through. Some things that you can literally do right now to help you navigate through that. And I'll tell you, they help me on a personal level daily as I'm dealing with the 5 beautiful little gremlins that live in my house, or when I'm dealing with situations at work or in the community. Okay? All right, so let's just kind of get some basic definitions down when we're talking about resilience. And I love this acronym of GRIT, guts, resolve, initiative, and tenacity. You know, one of the things that Dr. Duckworth demonstrated through her research was she followed various groups. She followed students in inner city schools, salespeople in high pressure commission-based sales roles. She followed new cadets at West Point. Right, and she was trying to figure out in all of these very different groups who succeeded and who didn't, and why. I think we find some sort of correlation between maybe it was their upbringing, maybe it was their economic situation, maybe it was something that they inherited along the way. And what she found is it was this. It was, did they have the grit to persevere when things got really, really rough? And that's really important because this is going to measure your success, especially when you're in transition, more than just about any other thing will, is your ability to continue to persevere in the face of trial, tribulation, and trouble. And by the way, kudos to all of you, because I think all of you are displaying this right now. The fact that you're on this call right now shows that you have a strong degree of grit. So kudos to all of you. So let's talk about some ways. I want to give you some ways you can build your mind up to be, as Dr. Duckworth says, to be grittier, to have a grittier kind of mindset, okay? And we're gonna give you about 4 things. So number 1 is recognize first if you have what we consider a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. So let's start with a fixed mindset, okay? Fixed mindset is kind of the perspective that things are as they are, that you have a certain amount of talents and gifts and skills that were basically given to you from birth or from a young age, that they are what they are. You have the hand you've been dealt, and you really don't have a lot of control over the outcome of situations, right? So it's sort of like a it is what it is, right? Kind of scenario. What we have found through lots of research over the last few decades is generally people with a fixed mindset, you oftentimes may see some degree of success early in a career, an endeavor, a new project, whatever, but it typically flatlines or plateaus relatively early. Why? Because if you have a fixed mindset, if you believe things are as they are, do you really have any incentive or desire to challenge yourself, to take a risk, to go outside your comfort zone? Probably not. Because at the end of the day, a fixed mindset often is coupled with a strong sense of anxiety or fear. Now, I'm not going to be some pie in the sky, Pollyanna-ish kind of person that's going to pretend like you can just snap your fingers and all anxiety and fear goes away. But what I do believe in are small incremental challenges, small incremental steps. So, I like to work out. I think a lot of you on this call probably have a regular exercise regimen. Some of us picked up an exercise regimen over the quarantine just to keep ourselves from going insane. And what I know from my friends who are trainers and sports therapists is consistent progress, consistent small incremental progress often yields much better results than trying to just win the marathon in one fell swoop, okay? So when we talk about that, that's more speaking to a growth mindset. It's the belief system that failure is not the end of the story, that there is not a finite cap on your skills, your abilities, your knowledge, your talents. While they may change throughout your lifetime, while you may transition how you allocate or how you utilize those talents or knowledge, they're not finite. You can always learn and grow more. You look at somebody like Teddy Roosevelt, right? And Teddy Roosevelt was known to all throughout his, not just his presidency, but throughout his entire life. They say, I mean, I don't know, I wasn't there, but they say that he on average read 5 books every day. He was an avid reader, avid speed reader, could read very quickly. And he read on average 5 books a day his entire life. He had a growth mindset. Nothing was ever set or fixed. He could always continue to learn and grow more. And it's the idea that you can see challenges, you intentionally craft your perspective to see challenges as opportunities, as ways to grow. Now, this sounds really nice. Well, let's talk about some ways you can actually develop this, okay? The first one is what we consider your explanatory style. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the research here for the sake of time, but Dr. Martin Seligman, also from the University of Pennsylvania, did some incredible experiments about 40 years ago trying to understand the idea of learned helplessness. So quick show of hands. Anybody heard this idea of learned helplessness, right? I've seen a couple hands, a couple heads shaking, right? It's the idea that, when you go through a bad situation, or if you have somebody that goes through a difficult or troublesome situation, that they almost learn that that is going to be their situation forever. We see it with human beings, we see it with animals. Right? So, if we take an animal that is wild and then we put it into a zoo, into a cage, there's a degree, I'm not, criticizing this isn't a political stance, but there's a degree of learned helplessness. The animal learns that I no longer have to hunt, that the zookeepers bring me the food, right? I've learned that. That wasn't native or natural to me. I learned that behavior. Now that can be sometimes positive, but it oftentimes isn't, because what it does is it makes the person that's in that mindset codependent on whatever the outside circumstances. And what Dr. Seligman found was, as he was doing his experiments, he would notice that he would find groups that he was experimenting with dogs primarily, and he would have groups of dogs that when put under stress, they would have a sense of learned helplessness if they felt like they didn't have any control over the situation. So if they couldn't get out of a bad situation, they would just sort of curl up in a fetal position. learned helplessness. However, the surprising part about his research was there was always about 1/3, it was about 1/3 of the dogs every time, even though they had the same situation, even though they had the same stresses and pressure, they wouldn't go into the fetal position. And he tried to figure out why. And what he found was and he extrapolated this over the next several decades. It was this idea of your explanatory style. So your explanatory style is when something bad happens to you, a learned helplessness explanatory style says is what we call me, always, everything. So let me give you an example that might hit close to home. And I hope this isn't too painful, but I do think it's relevant, okay? So let's say you lost your job. You lost your career. A me, always, everything style would explain it as something like, I'm such a loser. I screwed up, and I knew I was never going to be able to keep this job anyways. Me, it's my fault. This always seems to happen to me. I always am the first person to get cut. I'm always the first person that gets the short end of the stick, and this is never going to get any better. I'm probably going to be looking for a job for years. I mean, my God, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Am I even going to be able to find something? Always. And frankly, I'm going to probably lose my house. I'm going to lose my car. I'm going to lose my family. My kids are going to hate me. And this is going to completely train wreck my life. Everything. Me, always, everything. Okay. What Dr. Seligman found was if you transition it to not me, not always, not everything, you actually develop, you flex a resilience muscle. I'll give you an example of the same situation in that. Not me. Look, you know what? This sucks. And it doesn't mean that you're fake, by the way. This sucks that I lost my job. But you know what? The company went through a pandemic like every other company. They were down 30% in revenues. They had to make some difficult decisions. And unfortunately, my role was eliminated. It wasn't my fault. It just was a bad scenario that happened. Not me. And you know what? I've had to go through job transition before. It's not fun. It's not pleasant. I don't love it. But I found this job. Why couldn't I find another job? Not always. And you know what? My wife, my husband, my partner, and I, we've been through a lot of difficult situations before. We've overcome those. We've overcome trials. They're not going to leave me. They've dealt with me when I was, having a bad day, or when I was having a bad month, or even a bad year. I know that they're going to stick with me through this. Not everything. You see the difference? So if you're struggling with a me, always, everything mentality, here's some things that you can do to help overcome that. And like I said, this might feel a little forced, but it actually is a helpful exercise. One, you want to ask yourself basically 4 questions. 1, what are the real facts? So when you find yourself saying, it is this, challenge it. Challenge that belief and say, is this actually what's going on? Are these the real facts? Or is this my interpretation of the facts? 2, are there any alternative explanations? That's a big one. It's a big one to say, are there any alternative explanations? Because what that's doing is challenging your brain to take a broader perspective versus just the emotional knee-jerk reaction to a bad situation. 3, what are the chances of these bad things actually happening? And I'll tell you, this is one that I struggle with, right? So I have a propensity to catastrophize when things are rough, like, oh my God, it's gonna be the end of the world. We're never gonna get past this. And I go all like, Chicken Little on everybody. And I sometimes have to take a breath and take a step back and say, okay, what's the likelihood this is really going to happen? I mean, what's the likelihood my worst fears are actually going to happen? Sometimes they really could, but in most cases, I am imagining a scenario that's dramatically worse than what's actually going to happen. And then lastly, and this is probably the most practical one, is this a useful belief or not? Right? So you may go through and say, yeah, you know what, maybe this was my fault. Maybe there's no alternative. And maybe this actually is going to have some negative implication on my life. But is this useful? Is this helping me? Look, let's be honest. You are not a victim of your beliefs or your emotions. You can exert some degree of will and some degree of control over what you choose to believe. It may feel difficult and feel, forced. That's okay. It can feel forced, but challenge it. If it's not useful, why do you have to hold on to it? Scrap it. right? Again, this isn't Pollyanna pie in the sky stuff. This is being judicious about what am I allowing my mind to dwell on. We're going to talk more about that in just a minute. But these are 4 questions you can ask yourself to help build your explanatory style. Okay? That's number 1. Number 2, iceberg beliefs. So iceberg beliefs are these core deep-seated beliefs, often unknown or unquestioned, that tend to guide our emotional reactions. Sounds like a lot. So let's play it out in real life. And I'm sure none of you have had this situation. So I'll pretend like this is somebody else. So say you're driving down the highway in the fast lane, going a reasonable 80 miles an hour. And all of a sudden some person swipes over into the fast lane going 55 and then 53 and then 50. And traffic's too blocked up in the middle lane so you can't swerve around them. And they keep going slower and slower and slower, right? And pretend you had some emotional reaction to that. Now, I'm sure, like I said, none of you can identify with that one, but that's one that I've heard people have struggled with in the past. You know, when we think about it at the superficial level, what's going on? We say, well, that jerk over there cut me off and he doesn't know how to drive his car anyways, and he's driving slow in the fast lane. He's just an idiot, right? That's probably the way we would explain that. And while there may be some truth to that, what we want to also look at is the underlying belief. What's the underlying belief you have? Well, 1, people should not drive slow in the fast lane. That's an underlying belief. But let's go even deeper. What's your personal belief? The personal belief is probably a belief around respect. It's when somebody cuts you off, that is a demonstration of disrespect. And so the iceberg belief is I should be respected all the time. Now this sounds a little strange, doesn't it? Like somebody just cut me off on the highway and I'm having some deep psychological reflection on my, what I should be respected and all that. But it really actually does happen that way. We have all these deep beliefs about how we should be treated, how things should play out, how the world should go for me, for my family, for my community. And I think this year has shown us all that things very often don't go the way we think they should. So what you have to do is you have to question and challenge those iceberg beliefs. Because here's the problem. When you don't challenge iceberg beliefs, what happens is when you hit trouble, when you hit challenges, when you hit trials, those iceberg beliefs tend to drive a strong emotional reaction. So let me give you one that might be a little more relevant. If you don't get a call back on a job that you full well know you are very qualified for, you had the best resume, and you know that you're better than the competition, okay? And they don't call you back. They don't even give you an interview. Do you have an emotional reaction to that? I'm not saying that that's bad. But what I am saying is if you want to build your resiliency, you want to take a moment to sit with that emotional reaction and say, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling right now? Because here's the thing. If you get dominated by those emotional reactions, it will reduce your resiliency. What you'll find is if you don't question your iceberg beliefs and you let them drive those emotional reactions, what happens is it slowly erodes your resiliency. You ever notice somebody that, like, when you maybe first started working with them, maybe they had a chip on their shoulder, little, they kind of like a little irritable, and then over years or over time, you notice that their fuse gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. It seems like they're set off easier and easier. It's because those iceberg beliefs go unchallenged and it actually erodes your resiliency. That's why it's important to challenge those. And number 3, catastrophizing. Like I said, I have a struggle with this one. And what it typically happens is we don't go in this little, silly graphic here. We don't go from point A to point B in just one step. We don't go from, I got a C on my exam to, oh my God, the world's over. We go in a couple sequential steps. And the sneaky part about it is those sequential steps are usually semi-logical. They actually have some degree of truth to them. But what happens is they get progressively shadier to when then at the end, that's when the snowball effect happens. So in this example, it's I got a C, I could lose my scholarship. Is that realistic? Maybe if you were in college. Then I'll have to take out more loans. oh my God, the world is over. You see how you make that leap there at the end from these semi-logical steps? Same thing applies to applying or looking for a new career, right? It could be, I didn't get a call back for this interview, or I didn't get a call back for that resume that I sent in or that application. And all of a sudden you find yourself in a panic. And that's what happens when you catastrophize, is your brain goes into panic mode. And when you're in panic mode, you don't make rational decisions. In fact, you're being driven by the limbic system, the part of your brain that's all about survival and reaction and emotion. And so when you do that, the problem is you're not going to make very logical or rational decisions. And when you don't make logical and rational decisions, you're probably not going to make the best step forward. So if you find yourself catastrophizing, and the litmus test for this is, do you find yourself in a panic at times? Find yourself kind of seeing that, speaking in terms of superlatives or extremes. It's all over. It's all going to end. This is never going to get better. Extremes, and they're kind of all encompassing. Remember those explanatory styles. That's a form of catastrophizing. So let's talk about what you can do if you're struggling with a sense of catastrophizing. All right. So number one, write out the links in your catastrophic chain. Now listen, I'll tell you, I'm one of those people that I know on paper I'm supposed to do things like journal and reflect and meditate, but I'm horrible at all those things. I hate kind of doing any of those, right? I hate journaling. I've tried to journal for like 20 years now, and I always do it for like a week, and then I give up on it. So I can tell you right now, if you're a dude, John, I do not like to write things out. You and me are in the same boat right now. I'm right there with you. But what I will tell you is this exercise is actually quite powerful, very powerful, because what it does is a lot of times in our brains, that point A to point B jump seems like a logical jump, and it seems like the only jump, and it seems like it's just 2 steps. But when we write out those sub steps in between, we start to see how our brain is making these leaps. And that's an important first step. You got to see where you're making the leaps before you can start to unwrap them, okay? Number 2, assign a plausibility value of 1 to 10 for each step, okay? And in 10 being very likely, definitely going to happen, 1 being probably close to impossible, right? So I got up to see on my exam, that's step 1. I could lose my scholarship. What's the probability? A 6, an 8, a 4, a 10, right? So, what's the probability? Give a numeric value. It's important. You got to put a quantifiable numeric value to whatever that step is, okay? Then anything that's less than an 8, try writing out reasons it won't happen. So let's say I got a C on my exam, right? And then I have as my next, semi-logical link, I could lose my scholarship. I'm going to say that's a 6. And then reasons it won't happen. Well, it's just 1 exam. I know from the syllabus that I have 3 more exams before the semester's over. And we also have written assignments and a research paper at the end. This isn't the only grade. And so would I really lose my scholarship for this? And even on top of that, even if I failed this class, what are the parameters of my scholarship? Is it that, would it drop my GPA enough that it would like actually make me lose the scholarship? Right? So actually write out reasons it won't happen. And then for those that are your worst fears of these, come up with a list of steps to mitigate those. Give yourself a plan. Right? So if you go through this 4-step process and your worst fear is having to take out more loans because you might possibly lose your scholarship, actually embrace it. So once you have these reasons it won't happen and you've put some rational thought to this, let's take a step to lean into those worst fears and actually make a plan. Because when we catastrophize, it's often because we feel a lack of control. We feel a lack of agency over the situation. So what's the best thing we can do? Give us a plan. Make a plan. Make a sense of control for the situation. Come up with a list of steps to mitigate those worst fears. What are you going to do? If I lose my scholarship, well, I can go get a part-time job, right? I mean, I can go get a job and help pay for some of my tuition fees. Or, maybe I can apply for some different scholarships, or I can see if there's some grants, or I can see if there's other options. Come up with a contingency plan just in case. If you do this, I can tell you this. Again, I hate journaling, but I've done this before. And I can tell you from personal experience, when you do this, it actually starts to reprogram your brain. You will find yourself just naturally doing this internally, and you will actually find yourself not catastrophizing as often. You'll find yourself slowing down the train, slowing down the process. And when things start to get crazy, you'll find yourself saying, okay, let's be a little more rational about this. And it's a fun little trick because you won't even realize it until after the fact. And then you'll say, oh my gosh, this normally would have completely freaked me out, and I feel okay right now. It's a really powerful thing to do. All right, so like I said, those are things that help equip your mind, right? Upgrade your explanatory style, challenge your iceberg beliefs, and do some things to stop catastrophizing. So now I want to transition, right, to what can you do if you are in a panic? Because here's the deal. Look, let's be honest with ourselves. You can put all these right processes in place, and you're still going to have times where the kids are screaming and you just got that rejection letter from an organization and it's pouring down rain outside and you got a flat tire. You're basically living out a country song right now, and you're like, it's the worst day ever, and you go into a panic. I know I do, okay? So what are some things that you can do in the moment to calm down that emotional reaction, to keep yourself from getting overwhelmed, and to build that real-time practical resilience, okay? Step one, and this is simple, exercise. Over and over and over again, we've shown that physical activity has a huge bearing on our mental state. Now, this is probably more important than ever, not only because we're in a highly stressed mental state, but also because with the lockdown and quarantines, but even the social distancing now, I know a lot of us probably, even if we've done a home exercise program, we may not be doing what we used to do, right? And we may be sitting more, maybe sitting in our home office or our bedrooms more. We don't have the commute, we don't have the walking that we used to. So it's important to get physical activity when you're stressed. The best one, scientifically proven. I'll give you 2 activities you can do, okay? And you can choose. So the best one, one of the proven best ones actually is yoga. Hear me out. So yoga has, and by the way, I'm only beginning to practice yoga, okay? But yoga has actually been shown scientifically to reduce stress, and it does it in a very interesting way. And if I have any yoga practitioners on there, you could probably attest to this. So, we think like yoga works because it's relaxing music maybe, or because you're stretching, and that is true. But one of the things they found just in the last few years is you have nerve receptors all through your neck, your cheeks, your clavicle, your shoulders, right? These are nerve receptors for your autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system is what kicks into gear when you feel stressed. You have a hormonal response through cortisol, and you have an autonomic nervous response, right? The fight or flight, adrenaline, going nuts, right? Trying to get out of the bad situation. Funny thing, when you do yoga, when you invert your body, you're doing these stretches, you're doing these poses, what they've shown is it puts pressure strategically on those nerve receptors. And so literally, you're tricking your brain into relaxing whether it wants to or not. Isn't that crazy? Even if you are completely freaked out, by doing some of these poses, it will force pressure onto those nerve receptors, which forces your brain to chill out and turn off the autonomic nervous response. I find that pretty cool. Now, not all of us have access to yoga, though there are some really great YouTube videos and resources out there right now. The other thing that you can, do that maybe is a little more accessible for everyone is go for a walk. They've actually shown that walking hits just the right amount of VO2. So VO2 is just kind of a way that we measure how hard your body's working. It's one measurement we can use. And it hits right at the sweet spot. A brisk walk hits right at the sweet spot where you're not pushing it too hard. You're not taking it too easy. It goes right there in the middle, which is exactly what you want to relieve stress. And when you're overwhelmed, and I bet a lot of you could attest to this, you feel freaked out, stressed out, anxious, overwhelmed. You go for a quick walk around the block and you feel a little better, don't you? It really does work. So here's what I recommend people do. We know that intuitively. So take what you know intuitively and intentionally put it to work. So when you feel like it's going to be a stressful moment, preemptively, go for a walk preemptively beforehand. Or when you know it's going to be a rough afternoon, intentionally carve out time to go for a walk or to do yoga or something like that. And when you do it intentionally, what you're doing is you're going to preemptively sort of cut the head off of the stress monster before it rears up and tries to bite you. Okay? So that's number one. That's a practical intervention you can do. This one is a really fun one, and it's going to totally, at least when I first saw it, it totally took me outside my assumptions and comfort zone. And that was using strategic distractions. Okay, so here's a funny bit of research that you might find interesting. I bet a lot of you, when you think about it, can attest to this. Say you have, say you're in a work situation and you have a stressful conversation with your boss, okay? Maybe it took 5 minutes. Your boss yelled at you for something and it stressed you out, okay? So when we look at it at the end of the day, how much actual time have you been under stress? 5 minutes. But the interesting thing is what we've found now through more modern research is as you think about that situation, as you replay that scenario in your brain, as you ruminate on what happened, you know, as you sit in your cubicle or at your desk and you're like, God, that guy is such a jerk. I can't believe he talked to me like that. And, you know, he always disrespects me. And man, if I could just tell him a piece of my mind, and you ruminate and think and think and think, here's what they found. Your brain actually experiences the exact same degree of stress as if you're reliving it again and again and again and again and again. So you may have only been under stress for 5 minutes, but if you think about it, if you ruminate on it again and again and again throughout the day, your brain and body will behave like you've been under stress for 5, 6, 8 hours. And that's why you have these people that come home from work, they're just wiped out. Okay, so here's some creative ways to interrupt your brain from ruminating. It's creatively do distraction. And what they actually found, and I was surprised to see this, what they actually found one of the best ways to do it was the game of Tetris. So, I mean, if you're old school like me and you know Tetris, or you play Tetris on like a Game Boy or something, you know the game, right? Tetris is a great game because it just engages your enough. It's a puzzle, and it engages your academic, your rational brain just enough to captivate your attention without it being overwhelming. So let me give you one that's not a good game. And you can pick whatever game you like. Candy Crush, bad game. Don't play Candy Crush when you're stressed out. You want to have fun? Play Candy Crush. You want to just kill some time? Play Candy Crush. You're stressed out? Don't play. Do you know why you don't play Candy Crush? Because Candy Crush actually had psychologists on the team when they were developing the game to give them feedback on how to make the game more addictive and how to actually increase your dopamine, but also your cortisol levels so that you want it more and more and more. And that's why you have people that sink like, you know, $400 and an hour and a half of their life on, you know, Candy Crush. You want to find something that's just engaging enough to keep your brain moving, but not so engaging or not so overwhelming that it stresses you out more. Then you figure out what works for you, right? So for me, I kid you not, I ended up downloading it was a free game where you like trace puzzles on your screen. There's like 100 different versions of games like this. It's just enough to make me think, but it's not so much to make me feel overwhelmed. Okay, no crazy sounds and lights and all that. You're just tracing puzzles. And what they found through the research is when you do that, it takes about 10 minutes. If you do that for 10 minutes when you are overwhelmed, stressed, feeling the burnout, all of that, that's usually the right amount of time to re-engage the rational side of your brain, calm down the emotional side of your brain, and actually get you kind of thinking with your head on straight again. So that's number 2. So number 1 was exercise. Number 2, creatively distract yourself. So let's go to number 3. Number 3 is breathe strategically. Okay, so here's what happens. If you think about it, when you are stressed, how do you typically breathe if you're not conscious of it? What you typically do, most people do, is they first take shallower breaths. They're not as deep. They don't go down to their abdomen. They breathe from the top of their chest, up here in the top of their lungs. So they're shallow breaths. They're not filling up their whole abdomen. The second thing, though, is they breathe faster, right? So you start to, in some cases, you could hyperventilate, but you're at least ventilating faster than your normal rate. And what happens is, and Dr. Amy Cuddy did some really cool research about how your body can affect the way that your mind thinks. And one of the things we find is when you breathe faster, so you feel stressed, you breathe faster, well, guess what happens? It creates a cycle. So you start to feel even more stressed, which then makes you breathe faster, which then makes you feel more stressed, and on and on and on. You create this loop. So one of the things that you can do is breathe strategically. And frankly, I love this one because you can do this literally anywhere. And most people don't know that you're doing it. And it's great when you're having a really difficult conversation with somebody. And here's the trick. So there's a lot of science around the exact pacing and breathing, and you could speak to an expert to get some of the deeper nuance of it. But I find the simplest formula is what we call the 4 cubed formula. You breathe in for a count of 4, you hold for a count of 4, you breathe out for a count of 4. That's it. And what you'll find is if you do that for about 1 minute, that's all it takes is literally 1 minute. What it literally will do is trick your brain into calming down. Because think about it, what do you do when you're calm? You breathe nice and easy. And it will trick your brain. You know, we talk lately a lot about life hacks. You see all these things on YouTube or wherever else on life hacks. This is a stress hack. Breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, out for a count of 4. Pace the breathing. Take control of your body. And what it will do is it will begin to take control of your mind. Really easy one to do. Honestly, I do this one whenever I'm having a really tough conversation with somebody and they're maybe giving me an earful because they just want to, get it off their chest anyways. So for me, I can just right? And you can just take it in there, right? And they don't even know that I'm doing this, and I'm calming down while they're amping up and they feel heard. Isn't that cool? Yeah, did you have a question, Natalie?
No, I had looked down because someone, my boss texted me and I didn't hear you talking. I thought it was your voice fading out and I didn't realize that.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
it's
feel
fine.
free to wave or something at me, anybody, if
No,
I have
to
view up if you can't hear me anymore. But it's a really easy technique, and frankly, it works beautifully all the time. Now, you can't tell anybody that you're doing it though, because then they're going to catch you, right? So keep it, as a little secret. But that's a great technique. And then number 4 is have clear goals. Now, look, you're in the accountability group. I know that you all have goals. I know you all have clear goals. So I am not pretending to reinvent the wheel, and I'm not pretending to teach you something you don't know here, okay? But what I would like to suggest is one nuance of goal planning that was developed by Dr. Gabrielle Oettingen about 10 or 15 years ago. And it puts a really interesting spin on goal setting. So who here is familiar with SMART goals? Show of hands. You've heard of SMART goals before? Yeah. We've pretty much all heard of SMART goals, right? And there's different variations. You have OKRs, that's a goal setting and planning methodology made popular by a lot of Silicon Valley organizations. You have various other ones as well. I like this one because it's got a really crazy name. So Gabrielle Oettingen developed what she calls WOOP goals, right? Which is just ridiculous to say, but it's an absolute blast. Okay, and here's what's interesting about WOOP goals. So here's how it works out. So W stands for wish. What do you want to accomplish? Okay, what do you want? So let's be honest, everybody on this call, I'm going to guess, what do you want to accomplish? I want to get a new job. I want to get a new career. Is that a fair wish? Okay. The first O is outcome. What's the best possible outcome? So I get a job in my field at an organization I love that pays me the salary that I want and comes with a benefits package and a new Lexus, right? Or whatever. But that's the best possible outcome. Those parts are parts we know pretty well. And that's where the SMART part fits in. You want that outcome to be pretty specific, measurable, timely, relevant, all of that. Now, here's what Gabrielle found, though, through her research. So I'm going to pause for a second and kind of tell you one of the experiments, and then it'll help the rest of it make sense. So she was worked at New York University, and she had a couple hundred students that they split into two groups. Group A, they gave them like a video. They played them a video and gave them some articles on eating healthy and exercising, and they had to make an exercise plan. What do you want? What kind of exercise do you want to do? Okay. And that was Group A. Group B, they did the same thing, but then with the exercise plan, they sat them down and they said, what do you think is going to get in the way of you accomplishing this plan? And they had to actually articulate, well, I don't like to get up early in the morning and I have a really full schedule, and so that's the only time I can work out, so getting up early is going to be tough. Or I don't have access to a gym, so I'll have to probably buy some equipment or something. That's going to be an obstacle for me. Okay? And they made a plan on how to deal with those obstacles. Here's what they found. After just 2 weeks, the people who are in the second group were exercising on average about 2 hours more per week than Group A. Pretty cool, right? What's even better, though, was by the time they tracked it up to 6 months, nearly all the people in the second group were still working on their goals, even though they had no follow-up, no extra support, no outside resources. They simply were just following through on their plan, whereas most of the people in the first group had fallen off the wagon. And look, let's think about our New Year's resolutions, because that's a great way to articulate this. Right? I mean, isn't we make New Year's resolutions on January 30 or December 31st. And then isn't the second week of February have National Give Up on Your Resolutions Day or something like that? Because that's about the time it takes for our well-intentioned goals to completely fizzle out. We're like, I'm going to get in shape this year. And so I bought some new running shoes and I'm going to run. I'm going to lose some weight. I'm going to get ready for that marathon. I'm going to run the Flying Pig this year. And then, so week 1 in January, you're like, all right, we're going. I'm feeling good. I've got a goal and I'm going to do it. And then week 2 hits of January, and we're all from Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky, right? And so we're like, it's cold and it's dark. Why on earth would anybody do this? And you get to week 3, and now you're like, oh my God, it's cold, dark, and it's wet half the time too. And I just want to sleep. And I think it's I don't know if it's raining or sleeting or hailing. I mean, I think the heavens have just opened up. And then you get to about week 4 and you're about ready to give up. You're like, oh, the bed is so much comfier and it's so horrible out there and I don't want to do this. And so the thing is what we don't account for when we make those goals is we don't actively and rationally articulate the obstacles. And what Oettingen found in her research was when you articulate the obstacles and then you make the plans for what you will do, not if, but when those obstacles come up, you actually have a dramatically and exponentially higher likelihood of acting on, and then ultimately achieving your goals. Okay? So that's my challenge for all of you. I like some of I have the chat box open. I like this. One of the stories, don't start resolutions in January. Good idea. Midsummer resolutions are really nice. But the important thing with this is, as you are working on your plans, you have this phenomenal support group with the accountability group. You've got a phenomenal amount of resources that Natalie listed in the beginning of the session. I challenge you, or encourage you, I guess, to also say, as you work on your plans and your goals, clearly articulate what the obstacles are going to be. You're not being a Debbie Downer if you're doing that. You're saying, I'm going to be a realist. What are the challenges I'm going to face? And be honest and be thorough. And when you do that, then make a plan on how you're going to overcome them. And the best kinds of plans when it comes to obstacles like that are usually if-then plans, or when plans, or another way to put it. When this happens, I'm going to do this. When this comes up, I will do that, right? When the alarm clock goes off, I will get up and put on my running shoes. Now, if you're having some trouble following through on your commitments with that, you can do some other life hacks, right? There's other ways you want to reduce the barrier to entry. We can talk more about that another time if you're interested to hear more about that. There's been some really cool experiments around that as well. But like Sean Acor from Harvard University did some really cool stuff with that. But the idea is make clear what the obstacles are and what your plan is to overcome it. And lastly, before we wrap up for today, really recognize the difference between wishing and doing. And I think everybody on this call gets this, right? But there's a world of difference between wishing something was a certain way and then actually taking action. Because at the end of the day, when we take action, it's hard work. And there's a reason I chose these two photos, especially as we start to come into, I mean, fall's beautiful here. As we come into wintertime, a lot of us are gonna be wishing that we were in the situation on the left, strolling on a nice, beautiful beach where it's warm and sunny, everything's relaxed. But what it's gonna feel like is probably more what's on the right, trudging through the snow, step after step after step after step. But that is how we make the progress. It's not the monumental things, it's the incremental steps. One step, then another step, then another step, then another step. Here's the challenge though. A lot of times, myself included, I get overwhelmed because I'm so fixated on the goal that I miss, that it almost cripples me from taking the steps towards the goal. So let me encourage you as a fellow recovering anxious person, take the step, just one step. Think about what's the one step you're going to do today? What's the one step I can do tomorrow? What's the one step? For those of you who are maybe familiar with more about Kaizen methodology, if you have a background, say in engineering or manufacturing, or if you're familiar with the idea of continuous improvement, you know, Kaizen's all about 1%. Make it 1% better. You know, make it 1% better every day. Can you imagine where you're going to be if you just work on improving 1% every day, taking one step every day? I can tell you, I think a lot of us will be in a really good space, even in the midst of a pandemic, even in the midst of trial and trouble that we're all facing right now.